Have you ever wondered exactly how much agony it takes to shatter your mind? The cold, clinical truth is that your brain is a biological traitor. Under extreme psychological pressure or physical torture, your neural architecture is programmed to fail. Modern psychiatry calls it mental fragmentation, the precise moment when the prefrontal cortex surrenders, the ego dissolves, and you become nothing more than a screaming mass of raw primal reflex. History is a graveyard of icons who collapsed the second their internal software met a virus it couldn't delete. But tucked away in the forensic files of human history, there is a clinical anomaly that defies every known law of cognitive survival. We aren't talking about religion. We are performing a psychological autopsy on a total defiance of human biology. Analyze the case of Jesus not as a figure of worship, but as a high-value target under state-sponsored psychological warfare. While being hunted, betrayed, and subjected to a systematic dismantling of his nervous system, his brain did not fragment. On the contrary, his cognitive cohesion actually sharpened. How? Neuroscience struggles to map this zero reactivity state. While you are a slave to the memory trigger, kidnapped by a single insult or a spike in cortisol, this individual demonstrated a level of emotional management that technically shouldn't exist in our species. As we will see in the following evidence, he didn't just endure the trauma, he was editing the very meaning of the suffering while his lungs struggled for air. We are stripping away the myths to examine the most resilient mind ever recorded, a man who mastered the theater of the mind so deeply that his center of command remained untouchable while his hardware was being destroyed. Most people are prisoners of their own biology. This is the manual on how to be free. The clinical analysis of the Nazarene begins now. To understand the sheer magnitude of this case, we must isolate one specific event, the moment social pressure and lynch mob instinct collided. Picture a woman surrounded, an armed crowd, and a death sentence already signed by custom. In any scenario analyzed by behavioral science, the expected reaction from a leader would be direct confrontation or moral flight. But what this subject does deviates from every known survival protocol. He kneels and writes in the dust. Neuroscience explains that by refusing to react immediately to the attack, he disrupts the environment's aggressive loop. He doesn't offer resistance to the crowd's limbic system, he deactivates it. While everyone's brain in that circle was operating in attack mode, Jesus's mental architecture was in a state of focus so absolute that he dictated the rhythm of the situation instead of being swallowed by it. This is where deep behavioral analysis reveals the ghost in the machine. He applies a tactical silence that forces the other to encounter their own consciousness, a technique we now consider the pinnacle of emotional intelligence. When he finally speaks, "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone," he isn't just citing a law, he is firing a psychic trigger that forces every individual there to open an internal memory window. The result isn't a mystical miracle, it's a psychological checkmate. In a split second, the biological urge to kill was replaced by the crushing weight of self-awareness. Forensic analysis reveals a man who mastered the codes of thought so profoundly that he could disarm armies just by shifting their perception of reality. He wasn't playing their game, he was rewriting the rules of the human mind in real time. This is where the investigation hits a wall of pure physiological impossibility. To understand the Jesus anomaly, we have to look at what happens when the human body prepares to break. Biology dictates that under the shadow of a violent death, your nervous system triggers a massive dump of cortisol and adrenaline. Your breath becomes shallow and ragged. Your heart hammers against your ribs like a trapped animal. Neuroscience explains that in this state, the brain's rational executive shuts down, leaving only the raw, panicked instinct to scream or flee. But the forensic record of this man reveals a disturbing silence. While the hardware of his body was screaming in agony, sweat turning into thick drops of blood, lungs struggling for a single cubic inch of air, his cognitive software remained glitch-free. Behavioral analysis shows a man operating from a center of command that fear simply could not reach. He wasn't just enduring the pain, he was observing it from a state of total chilling autonomy. Think about the mental friction required to stay focused on the emotional rehabilitation of your executioners while your own nervous system is being systematically dismantled. This isn't just resilience. It is a total rupture of the human survival program. We are forced to face a diagnostic paradox. Jesus occupied the same biological vessel we do, yet he functioned as if he had deleted the very concept of self-preservation. While we are slaves to the slightest social insult, he remained the architect of his reality in the middle of a biological hurricane. The question isn't whether he was divine, but why our own minds are so easily hijacked by the noise of the world. If he broke the limits of human cognition, what is actually stopping you? The investigation of this case does not lead to a resolution, but to a clinical verdict on our own limitations. When we analyze the emotional management of Jesus, we aren't looking at a moral example. We are looking at a level of neural autonomy that defines us as an inferior developmental stage. Modern psychiatry confirms that the human mind is naturally reactive, a machine built to be hijacked by external stimuli. We are prisoners of the opinion of the other, slaves to cortisol spikes caused by a single digital notification or a sideways glance. Neuroscience identifies this as a failure of the prefrontal cortex to override the limbic system. But in the Nazarene, we see a brain that operated as if it had rewritten its own evolutionary code. While our heart rates skyrocket and our rational thought collapses under the slightest stress, the data from this case shows a heart rate that remained regulated, even during systemic physical destruction. This isn't inner peace. This is a total cold and calculated decoupling of the internal state from the external environment. The echo of this file is a diagnostic slap. We realize that we are psychological patients who haven't even mastered the basics of thought filtering. We live in a state of permanent mental leakage, where every trauma of the past and every fear of the future dictates our current pulse. Jesus, however, demonstrated a cognitive insulation that allowed him to remain the sole authority over his own consciousness while his biological hardware was being torn apart. The distance between his neural performance and ours is not a gap, it's an abyss. We are reactive biological units. He was a sovereign cognitive entity. This autopsy of the mind leaves us with one final frozen observation. We continue to be victims of our own biology, while he remains the only recorded human to have truly conquered it. The file is closed, but the pathology remains with you.